We're going to learn now about intermolecular forces. Intermolecular forces are forces that exist between molecules. And the strongest one we're going to talk about is called hydrogen bonding, which is about 1/10 as strong as a covalent bond, or a pure covalent bond. And it occurs between a partially positive hydrogen and the unshared pair of electrons on a highly electronegative element, such as nitrogen, oxygen, or fluorine. So if we take a look at, because molecules don't usually exist in isolation if they're, not in the gaseous state, you can see how those interactions would occur. If you had a couple molecules of hydrogen fluoride, or hydrofluoric acid you could call it, you have the partially positive hydrogen interacting with the highly electronegative fluorine's unshared pair of electrons, and that would be a very strong attraction holding those in place. Water is widely known for having hydrogen bonding, and that's a result of the hydrogen on one molecule, which is partly positive, as we learned in the last episode, because of the difference in strength between oxygen and the hydrogen, and the unshared pair of electrons on the partially negative oxygen in the other water molecule. So again, these are between molecules, not within the molecule. Ammonia also is another example of a molecule that exerts these forces on each other. So this is really strong, and it makes a huge difference in all sorts of things, including how proteins interact and drugs at binding sites and things like that. So dipole-dipole interactions are the next type we'll learn about, and that's just between any polar molecules. They don't necessarily need to be nitrogen, oxygen, or fluorine bonded to a hydrogen. You just need to have an uneven electron distribution in a partially positive and a partially negative end. And those two things would interact, such as in hydrochloric acid. So the partially positive hydrogen on one molecule would interact with the partially negative end on another molecule. And we can also have ion dipole interactions, which exist between polar molecules and ionic compounds. So ionic compounds will dissolve in polar solvents, such as water or hydrochloric acid a little bit. So you would have a partially negative end of a molecule interacting with a positive ion, and the hydrogen or the positive end would interact with the negative ion. So this will hold the solution together and allow things to dissolve. That's the difference that makes. And the weakest of the intermolecular forces we're going to talk about are London dispersion forces. And those exist only between nonpolar molecules, where, for example, if you have hydrogen, you have two even strength atoms, their electron clouds should be pretty evenly distributed. But occasionally, just because the electrons are moving around, there's a temporary lopsidedness. And when that happens, the side where there's more electrons will become partly negative. And what that's going to do is it's going to interact with neighboring molecules and induce a dipole in them, because the electrons in this molecule will be repelled by that, and this end will then become partly positive, just like this one, and there'll be that temporary force of attraction. Now, truthfully, these London dispersion forces exist in all of them. So for example, if you have a molecule with hydrogen bonding, such as water, it really has London dispersion forces. It also has dipole-dipole interactions, and it has hydrogen bonding. However, for nonpolar molecules, this is the strongest force they have. Now, for small molecules, it doesn't make a huge difference. For example, hydrogen gas is an incredibly low boiling point. It becomes a gas, not far above absolute zero. However, when you get into larger molecules, this is like a skeleton structure for a decane, which is a hydrocarbon with 10 carbon atoms. The more of these little interactions they have, the bigger of an impact it has. So when you're talking about a large protein with hundreds of amino acids in it, you're going to have a lot of these intermolecular forces holding it together, and that's going to keep it held together and in the solid state. These intermolecular forces can impact a lot of things, including boiling point. For example, when something boils, it's going to go from a liquid, which is a condensed state, to a spread out gaseous state. In order for the molecules to separate, they have to overcome their intermolecular forces. So the stronger they're held together, the less likely they are to just break apart. That also has to do with the vapor pressure, which is the force exerted at the surface of a liquid by the molecules, basically how hard they're trying to escape. It's going to lower that if there's a strong intermolecular force. It's going to prevent them from just escaping, and that's directly related to the boiling point, or inversely related to the boiling point. And it also increases the surface tension. Like if you do a belly flop into water, which is molecules that are very strongly held together, it hurts, because you have to break that surface tension in order to penetrate the water. The stronger the intermolecular forces, the higher the surface tension. It also increases the viscosity, and you can tell that if you've ever poured gasoline versus pouring water, or even like maple syrup, the viscosity increases as the intermolecular forces increase. And it also impacts the amount of energy required for phase changes, because when you're going from a solid to a liquid, you're overcoming the attractions that are holding them statically in place and allowing them to slide past each other. And then to go from a liquid to a gas, you are taking a liquid, which is a condensed state, and then pulling them completely apart. All of those would have to do with how strongly the molecules are held together.